Hello, welcome to Unit 4 of our course. Unit 4 begins on Sunday, May 4th and ends on Saturday, May 10th at 11:59 p.m. I look forward to working with all of you during this unit. In this unit of the course, you have the typical assignments, the typical types of assignments that we've had previously. There are 2 discussion board questions, and you are asked to post a total of 3 responses for each of the discussion boards. Remember that you are asked to post your own initial response to the question, and then a minimum of 2 responses to other students' comments for each question. Also, you will be asked to submit a primary source assignment. There are 2 documents that you're asked to read and then respond to the questions related to those documents. And then finally, there is a film review for this week. So I would like to spend a little bit of time, introducing each of these assignments and the topics that they cover. The discussion boards. The first discussion board question deals with President Andrew Jackson. The 1820s to 1830s are often referred to as the Age of Jackson. Sometimes this period is called Jacksonian America. Very few periods in American history are named after a single person. In fact, this is the only period in American history that is generally referred to in reference to a single individual. Andrew Jackson is a very interesting figure in many ways, and very controversial. In the 19th century, Andrew Jackson was almost universally celebrated as a hero in mainstream American culture. However, more contemporary analyses of Andrew Jackson point out many of the negative aspects of his life and presidency. Andrew Jackson grew up in the American South during the Revolutionary War. During the Revolution, he served as a runner. He was a relatively young boy and adolescent during the Revolution. He ran delivering messages for the patriots, for those seeking independence. He was captured by the British, and a British soldier actually slashed his face with a sword after he refused to shine the soldier's boots. Both of his parents died by the end of the Revolution, and he was left, as a relatively young person, as an orphan, if you will. He became a lawyer and a prosecutor for a time. He served in the military and ultimately became a general. He participated in the quote-unquote Indian Wars, fighting against Native American tribes. He also proved to be a heroic figure in the War of 1812. He led the defeat of the British at the Battle of New Orleans in the War of 1812, and that's really what catapulted him to fame. In many ways, he was the first popular politician in American history. All of the previous presidents viewed themselves as aristocrats, as gentlemen, and they would not, in their view, quote-unquote, stoop to appealing to the masses. In other words, George Washington, John Adams, Thomas Jefferson, they didn't campaign in any sense like we would think of it today for president. First of all, they denied that they sought the presidency, and they waited until their friends and associates and admirers asked them whether they would be interested in running for president. It was thought that that was the gentlemanly thing to do, not to go out and try to campaign for the president. That was ungentlemanly. And certainly there was no effort by the early presidents to reach out for the average citizen's vote. In fact, quote-unquote average people, if you will, really couldn't vote in early American elections. From 1783, when the United States gained its independence, up into the early 1820s, you had to own a substantial amount of property in order to vote. So only about 20 to 25% of white men could vote in the period from 1783 into the early 1820s. So the vast majority of even white males, who were the sort of privileged group in society, the vast majority of white males couldn't vote either. Andrew Jackson was the first really to break the mold on this. Andrew Jackson presented himself as a quote-unquote man of the people, as an ordinary person, someone who was raised, without great wealth in the frontier area, in relative poverty. And he wanted to reach out and appeal to, ordinary people, not, wealthy landowners and merchants and businessmen. Now, it should be said, when Andrew Jackson spoke of ordinary people, this was not all-inclusive. He really is speaking sort of exclusively to men. Women still could not vote. And also, he's speaking largely to the white male population. Andrew Jackson certainly wasn't a great champion of equal rights for racial minorities. In fact, he owned a handful of slaves during his life. He wasn't a large slave owner like Washington or Jefferson, but he certainly was not opposed to the institution of slavery either. Also, he generally had a somewhat hostile perspective towards Native Americans, although he would later in life adopt a Native American as his son. So he's really trying to champion the average, quote-unquote white male, if you will. And it's during this period of time that states begin to revise their voting laws to eliminate the property requirement. In the 1820s up into the early 1830s, almost every state abolishes the property qualification for voting, thereby extending the right to vote to all white men in society, regardless of whether they're wealthy or poor. Andrew Jackson benefits from this. He receives most of the vote from, relatively poor white men living in frontier areas, and he's elected to the presidency as a result. As president, his presidency was quite controversial. I'm sure you will read quite a bit about that as you examine your text. Among the more controversial aspects of his presidency were his policies towards Native Americans. Andrew Jackson did not have a very favorable view generally of Native American tribes, and he supported the removal of Native American peoples from their ancestral homelands to reservations in Oklahoma. That's actually connected to the film assignment for this week. The film assignment of this week deals also with the displacement of Native peoples from their ancestral lands. So a brief comment about that. Native Americans had received mixed messages from the United States government from the very beginning. The Native American tribes were somewhat divided on the issue of the Revolutionary War. A majority of Native American tribes opposed the independence of the United States and supported the British during the Revolutionary War. There was good reason for this. The British had established a proclamation line and asserted that no American settlers would be allowed to move west of the proclamation line. Native Americans, of course, viewed this as a positive, that white settlers wouldn't be able to move further west. And of course, the defeat of the British in the Revolutionary War did away with the proclamation line and opened the West to further settlements by American colonists. Only a relatively small number of tribes supported the revolutionaries during the American Revolution. So among those were the Iroquois of upstate New York, central New York, the Syracuse, Utica, Rome area, and certainly the Iroquois ultimately benefited from their support for the revolution. They were one of the very few tribal groups that were able to stay on their land following the Revolutionary War. Now, after the Revolution, the initial message of the United States government was encouragement for Native peoples to assimilate into Anglo or white culture, if you will. Native Americans faced tremendous pressure in early American history, shortly after the Revolution, to assimilate, to essentially to embrace English as their language, to dress in Western-style clothing, to abandon their own languages and cultures and traditions, to practice Christianity, to practice settled agriculture. And many native tribes did, often reluctantly, move towards assimilation. For example, the Cherokee tribe in the southeastern part of the United States, in the area of Georgia, Mississippi, decided that the best policy would be to embrace assimilation, since that's what the United States government was promoting. And the Cherokee, along with a number of other native tribes in the southeastern region of the United States, embraced English, converted to Christianity, practiced settled agriculture, organized farms, even going so far as to purchase slaves, which at this time was viewed as a part of mainstream American culture as well. They assumed that assimilating would allow them to stay on their land. Unfortunately and tragically, this would not be the case. As they practiced settled agriculture, many whites looked at their land covetously, and many state governments looked at the land covetously, basically saying, this is profitable land, it's already been cleared, it's already been broken, it's already been planted, why shouldn't we take it over and essentially displace the Native Americans living there? Andrew Jackson essentially rejected the policy of assimilation. Jackson said, we don't want assimilated natives living on our land. We want to expel the native peoples from our country entirely, essentially, or to expel them to places that were considered undesirable or uninhabitable by most Americans. So Andrew Jackson embraced a policy of essentially forcing the native peoples to leave the rich agricultural land of the Southeast and to move them to the relatively arid land of Oklahoma. And the Cherokee actually filed a lawsuit against the United States, against actually the state of Georgia, challenging this policy. And they won their lawsuit. The Supreme Court said quite clearly that the state of Georgia did not have the right to displace them from their land. And unfortunately, though, Andrew Jackson ignored the ruling of the Supreme Court. Andrew Jackson said, the Supreme Court has made its decision, let them enforce it. Which is a very strange statement if you look at our government. The Supreme Court is in charge of interpreting the law, of saying what the law means. The Supreme Court has no obligation or power to enforce the law. The president, the office of the president, the executive branch of government, is supposed to enforce the laws. Andrew Jackson, by making this statement, in a sense is disregarding his constitutional responsibilities. It's his responsibility to enforce the law, not the responsibility of the courts. So that's an issue you see in the film review also. Our second, also I should say, the primary source documents for this week also deal with the issue of quote-unquote Indian removal, Native Americans being displaced from their land. And you'll see some differing perspectives in the two texts that you read and analyze for this week. The second discussion board question for this week, I think you'll also find to be of interest. And it deals also with the issue of Indian removal, quote-unquote Indian removal. And you'll be asked to evaluate and assess American policies towards Native Americans and to assess whether such policies were fair or not. So I think that you'll find this to be an interesting unit and an engaging unit. I look forward to interacting with you on the discussion boards. Remember, I generally grade the material for the week on the Sunday or Monday following the end of the unit. So our unit ends on Saturday, May 10th at 11:59 p.m. Eastern Time. You can expect that grades will be posted probably on Sunday, May 11th or Monday, May 12th. I look forward to working with all of you. Thank you very much, and I hope you enjoy the unit.